A homeless veteran, adrift after his service, inherits a forgotten barn. But what he discovered in the loft, untouched for 50 years, was not just an inheritance, it was a reckoning. It was a story that would either break him for good or finally show him the way home. If you've ever felt like you're at the end of one road and don't know where the next one begins, if you've ever felt lost in the world, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and join our community. We tell stories for people who are finding their way back. Now, let's get into this. The air in the bus station tasted of diesel fumes and disinfectant, a combination that had become the scent of my life for the past 2 years. 2 years of shelters, transitional housing, and waiting rooms. 2 years of fluorescent lights humming over cracked linoleum floors. I sat on a hard plastic bench, my back pressed against the cold tile wall, and held the two things that now constituted my entire world. A one-way bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of called Havenwood, and a thin, crinkled envelope from a law firm. My duffel bag, containing a change of clothes, a worn-out sleeping bag, and my discharge papers, sat at my feet like a loyal, exhausted dog. It was everything I owned. The letter had arrived a week ago, forwarded from the VA office to the shelter with an air of impersonal bureaucracy. I almost threw it away. Official-looking mail had only ever meant bad news. Collection notices, denied claims, formal notices to vacate. But something made me open this one. My fingers, numb from a cold that had settled deep in my bones, fumbled with the seal. The paper inside was crisp, expensive. It informed me, in sterile legal terms, that a Mr. Arthur Miller had passed away and that I, Elias Miller, his great-grandson, was the sole heir to his estate. The word estate sounded grand, promising. Then the letter clarified. The estate consisted of a single parcel of land and the structure upon it, a barn. The farmhouse and the surrounding acreage had been sold off decades ago to settle other debts. What was left was a 5-acre plot and a dilapidated outbuilding. There was a catch, of course. There was always a catch. The property came with 50 years of unpaid property taxes. The amount was staggering to a man whose net worth was currently hovering around $47. The lawyer, a Mr. Davies, had been clinical in his brief phone call. He'd already received a generous offer from a commercial developer who wanted the land for a new distribution warehouse. They were willing to pay off the back taxes and give me a lump sum that sounded like a king's ransom. "It's the simplest path, Mr. Miller," Davies had said, his voice smooth and detached. "You signed the papers, the money is wired to your account, and you can put all this behind you. A clean break." A clean break. I'd been trying for one of those since I'd come home. I'd tried changing cities, changing jobs, changing myself. But the past wasn't something you could just cut away. It grew back like a stubborn weed. The noise in my head, the memories that played on a loop behind my eyes, they followed me everywhere. The uniform came off, but the war stayed on. It clung to me like the smell of smoke. My family had tried, in the beginning, but my silences were too long, my temper too short. Friends drifted away. I couldn't hold a job because the world felt too loud, too fast, too demanding. Eventually, the floor fell out and I landed here, on this plastic bench, clutching a ticket to nowhere. The developer's offer was the smart move, the logical one. It was enough money to get an apartment, a used car, to build some kind of wall between me and the street. It was a chance to be anonymous, to disappear into a new life with a padded bank account. So why did I use the last of my money on a bus ticket instead? Why was I heading toward this useless barn in the middle of nowhere? I didn't have an answer. Maybe it was just the last option on a list of dwindling choices. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the name. Arthur Miller, my great-grandfather. A man I knew nothing about, a ghost in my family tree. My own grandfather, his son, had died before I was born, and my father never spoke of him. It was a blank space in my history. Inheriting a barn felt less like a gift and more like a question I felt compelled to answer before I signed it all away. A disembodied voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the final boarding call for the bus to Portsmouth, with connections to points north. That was me, points north. I stood up, my joints protesting. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder, the weight of it familiar and grounding. I looked around the terminal one last time, at the tired faces, the transient lives intersecting for a brief moment under the hum of the lights. I was one of them, but I was also leaving. I didn't know if I was running towards something or just running away from this. But for the first time in a long time, I was moving. I walked toward the gate, the crinkled letter a fragile promise in my pocket. The automatic doors hissed open, and I stepped out into the cold, gray morning, the diesel fumes thick in the air. The bus was waiting, its engine a low rumble, like a patient, sleeping beast. I gave my ticket to the driver, a man with a face like a road map, and climbed aboard. I found a seat by a grimy window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass as the city began to slide away. The concrete and steel slowly gave way to strip malls, then suburbs, then finally to the wide open expanse of the countryside. The world outside was turning brown and gray, the trees bare skeletons against a pale sky. Winter was coming. I wondered what I would find in Havenwood. I wondered if I would find anything at all. The journey north was a long, hypnotic crawl. The bus moved with a lurching rhythm, a steady rocking that seeped into my bones and threatened to lull me into a sleep I couldn't afford to take. I watched the country unfold through the smudged glass of the window. The urban sprawl bled into skeletal suburbs, which in turn dissolved into endless fields, fallow and brown under a bruised-looking sky. Every few hours, the bus would pull into a small town that looked like the last one, with a single main street, a blinking traffic light, and a diner that had seen better days. At each stop, a few people would get on or off, their faces etched with the quiet resignation of rural life. I was a ghost among them, a silent observer with no connection to this world I was passing through. My mind, untethered, drifted back. It always drifted back, to the dust and the heat, the constant grinding tension of deployment. The faces of the men in my unit, young and old, their eyes holding a mixture of bravado and stark terror. I remembered the sudden, deafening silences that were more terrifying than the noise. I remembered the feeling of my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. And I remembered the quiet flight home, the world outside the plane window looking alien and strange, a place I no longer belonged to. They give you a medal and a handshake, and they send you back into a world that kept spinning while you were gone. You're supposed to slot back in, pick up where you left off. But the slot isn't there anymore. Or maybe you're not the right shape to fit it. I must have dozed off, because I was startled awake by the bus driver calling out, "Havenwood! Next stop, Havenwood!" I sat up, my neck stiff, and peered out the window. There was no town in sight, just a crossroads with a rusty signpost. A small, weathered depot stood on one corner, looking more like a shed than a station. This was it, the end of the line. I gathered my duffel bag and made my way to the front of the bus. The driver grunted as he opened the door. "Last one out," he said, not unkindly. "You sure this is where you want to be, son? Ain't much out here." "I'm sure," I lied. I stepped down onto the gravel, and the bus pulled away with a hiss of its air brakes, leaving me alone in a profound and sudden silence. The air was different here. It was sharp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I looked at the directions the lawyer had emailed me on my cheap, cracked phone before the battery died. Miller property, 3 miles east on Old Creek Road. 3 miles. I shifted the weight of the duffel on my shoulder and started walking. The road was a strip of cracked asphalt winding through dense woods. The trees crowded in on either side, their bare branches interlocking overhead, creating a tunnel of gray. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the gravel shoulder and the cry of a distant crow. It was unnerving, this quiet. In the city, there was always noise, a constant hum that filled the empty spaces. Here, the silence was a presence. It pressed in. I felt exposed, small. After what felt like an eternity, the woods began to thin, opening up to reveal rolling fields and the occasional farmhouse set far back from the road. Then I saw it, just as the lawyer had described, a 5-acre plot, overgrown with weeds and brambles, cordoned off by a sagging, barbed wire fence. And in the middle of it, sitting like a great, tired animal, was the barn. It was bigger than I had imagined, a massive structure of weathered silver-gray wood with a gambrel roof that was starting to bow in the middle. Some of the siding was missing, and one of the huge front doors hung crookedly on its hinges. But it was still standing, defiant. There was a strange, stark beauty to it. It had history. It had character. It felt more real than any of the glass and steel buildings I had left behind. I found a gap in the fence and pushed my way through the thorny brush. As I got closer, I could see the details, the intricate joinery of the beams, the hand-forged iron hinges, the way the foundation stones were perfectly set. This thing was built to last. The lawyer had said the key would be in a magnetic lockbox under the old water pump. I found the pump, a rusted relic half swallowed by weeds. I ran my hand underneath its cold, iron belly, and my fingers brushed against a small metal box. It clicked open, and a single, heavy skeleton key fell into my palm. It was ornate, made of brass that had tarnished to a dark green. I walked to the smaller side door of the barn, the one meant for people, not wagons. The lock was stiff with rust and disuse. I had to put my shoulder into it, but after a moment of resistance, the tumblers gave way with a loud, grinding clunk that echoed in the silence. I took a breath, turned the handle, and pulled the door open. A wave of cool, musty air washed over me, carrying the scent of old hay, dry earth, and time itself. The inside of the barn was dark, pierced by only a few stray beams of light filtering through cracks in the walls. I stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind me, plunging me into near-total darkness. For a second, a familiar panic flared in my chest, the fear of enclosed spaces, of the unknown. But then my eyes began to adjust. The space was cavernous, the ceiling soaring high above me. It was a cathedral of dust and shadows. My boots crunched on the dirt floor. As the shapes began to resolve themselves, I could see the ground floor was exactly what you'd expect. Empty stalls lined one wall, their wooden gates smooth from the touch of long dead animals. On the other side, ancient, rusted farm equipment lay shrouded in cobwebs, a plow, a thresher, a collection of scythes and pitchforks hanging on the wall like medieval weapons. Everything was covered in a thick, uniform blanket of dust, a gray velvet that had settled over 50 years of stillness. It was a perfect time capsule. I ran a hand along the top of a stall door, leaving a clean streak in the grime. The wood underneath was solid oak, worn smooth in places. I could almost hear the ghosts of this place, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of hay, the shout of a man's voice. I walked the length of the barn, my footsteps the only sound. It was cold, but it was a dry, clean cold, not the damp, seeping chill of the city. More importantly, it was a shelter. It was a roof over my head. It was mine. The thought was so foreign, so overwhelming, that I had to stop and lean against a massive support beam. Mine. I owned this. This piece of dirt, this crumbling building. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had in a very long time. It was a beginning, or an end. I still wasn't sure which. In the far corner, almost hidden in the gloom, I saw it. A simple wooden ladder, propped against the wall, leading up to the loft. The lawyer's letter had only mentioned the barn and the land. Nothing about its contents. I hadn't even considered what might be up there. More hay, I supposed. More junk. But curiosity, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, began to stir. I crossed the floor, the dust puffing up around my ankles. I tested the ladder with my weight. It creaked ominously, but held. I took a deep breath and began to climb, pulling myself up, rung by rung, into the deepening shadows above. The light was even scarcer up here, filtering in through a single, grimy, half-moon window at the far end of the loft. What I saw when my head cleared the floor made me stop, my hands gripping the top rung of the ladder. This wasn't a hayloft, not anymore. It was something else entirely. The air in the loft was still and heavy, thick with the smell of old paper and wool. The space was vast, stretching the entire length of the barn, the complex geometry of the roof beams crisscrossing in the gloom above. Dust motes danced like tiny stars in the single shaft of pale light slanting down from the grimy window. My eyes, still adjusting, scanned the space. It wasn't filled with hay bales or forgotten farm implements. Most of it was empty, a wide expanse of dusty floorboards. But in the center, directly under the peak of the roof, was a distinct area. It was an island of intention in a sea of neglect. A large, heavy canvas tarp, the color of desert sand, was draped over a collection of objects. It was tucked in neatly, deliberately, as if protecting something precious. I pulled myself the rest of the way into the loft, my boots making soft thuds on the wooden planks. The silence up here was even more profound than it had been below. I approached the tarp slowly, a strange sense of reverence settling over me. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a sacred space. I reached out and took a corner of the canvas. It was stiff and cold. I pulled it back. Underneath was not junk. It was a life. A small, Spartan, meticulously ordered life. There was a simple cot, the metal frame slightly rusted, with a thin mattress and a neatly folded wool blanket on top. Next to it stood a small, rough-hewn wooden table and a single straight-back chair. On the table sat a kerosene lamp, a tin cup, and a book. It was a monk's cell, a hermit's cave, built in the heart of the barn. It was a hiding place, but it was also a home. My gaze fell on the object that had been placed squarely in the middle of the table, as if it were the centerpiece, the most important thing in this small universe. It was a dark green metal footlocker, the kind soldiers use. It was closed, and a heavy padlock secured the latch. A wave of something, recognition, dread, kinship, washed over me. I knew that kind of box. I had one just like it, shoved in a storage unit I could no longer afford, filled with pieces of a life I no longer knew how to live. My eyes scanned the immediate area. Who had lived here? And why? I noticed a single rusty nail driven into the massive wooden post next to the table. And hanging from it, on a small piece of twine, was a key. It was small and brass, a perfect match for the padlock. My hand was shaking as I took it down. It felt warm, as if it had been waiting for my touch. I knelt before the footlocker. The key slid into the padlock with a satisfying click. I turned it, the mechanism groaned, and the lock sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Cedar and old paper, a scent that was both dry and rich. The contents were packed with the same care and precision as the rest of the small living space. On top lay a photograph in a simple wooden frame. I picked it up. It was a portrait of a young man, no older than 20, in a high-collared military uniform. The sepia tones told me it was old, from another time, another war. He had a strong jaw, serious eyes, and a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He looked impossibly young to be wearing a uniform, to be facing whatever he was about to face. This had to be him. Arthur Miller, my great-grandfather. He looked like me. Or rather, I looked like him. The same set of the jaw, the same intensity in the eyes. Beneath the photograph was a stack of letters, hundreds of them, tied in bundles with faded red ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes was elegant, feminine. They were addressed to Arthur Miller, Havenwood, but they hadn't been mailed. They were pristine. Next to the letters was a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with use. And beneath that, something that made my breath catch in my throat. Bundles of cash. Old bills wrapped in paper bands. I lifted one out. They were 20s and 50s. I quickly, roughly, counted one bundle. It was $2,000. There were at least 10 bundles. $20,000. Maybe more. It was enough. It was more than enough to pay the back taxes, with plenty to spare. It was the clean break the lawyer had talked about, handed to me on a silver platter. I could take this money, sign the papers, and walk away. No one would ever know. But I couldn't. My eyes were drawn back to the journal. The money was a solution, but the journal felt like an answer. I set the cash aside, my mind reeling, and lifted the heavy book out of the box. I sat down in the single wooden chair, the dust motes swirling around me in the fading light. The chair was hard, unforgiving, but it felt right. I opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was a man's, strong and clear, written in black ink. The first entry was dated November 12, 1919, the day after the first anniversary of the armistice. "They call it peace," it began. "The bells rang all day yesterday. People were cheering in the streets. They talk of a world made safe, a war to end all wars. They are liars, or fools. The war is not over. It is just quieter now. It has come home with me. It lives in my head. It wakes me in the night, with the sound of the guns and the screams of my friends. I see their faces when I close my eyes. Young boys sent to die in the mud. For what? For a line on a map? I came home a hero, they say. They pinned a medal on my chest. But I feel like a fraud, a ghost. The man who left this farm 2 years ago did not come back. I don't know who this person is, this stranger who wears my face and sleeps in my bed. I had to stop. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow. I looked up from the page at the desolate beauty of the loft. The words on the page were 100 years old, but they could have been pulled from my own mind. The same sense of dislocation, of being a phantom in your own life. I felt a connection to this man, this Arthur Miller, that was so powerful it was almost physical. I read on, my fingers tracing his words. He wrote every day. He described the difficulty of being home, the noise of the farm, the cheerful chatter of his family. It all felt like an assault on his senses. He loved his wife, Eleanor. He wrote about her with a tenderness that was heartbreaking. Her kindness, her patience, her smile. But he couldn't let her in. He felt a rage simmering just beneath his surface, a coiled spring of violence that terrified him. He was afraid he would hurt her or his young son, my grandfather. "I cannot be around them," he wrote one night. "I love them more than my own life, and that is why I must leave. Not leave them entirely. I could not bear that. But I must find a space where the noise cannot reach me, a place where I can be alone with the ghosts so they do not haunt my family. I will build my own trench, a sanctuary. Here, in the loft of the barn, it will be my secret, my peace. Eleanor will not understand, not at first, but she will. She knows I am broken. She will help me. It is the only way I can protect them from the war inside me." And so he did. The journal chronicled the building of his refuge. He described hauling the wood up, building the table, finding the cot. He wrote about the first night he spent up here, the profound sense of calm that settled over him as he listened to the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. It was a sound he could understand. It was honest. His wife, Eleanor, had agreed. It was their secret pact. She would tell the town he was away, working on a railroad crew up north. Every evening, she would bring him a plate of food and a thermos of coffee, leaving it at the bottom of the ladder. Sometimes she would leave a letter. Those were the letters I had found, the ones she had written to him, a one-way correspondence to the man who lived 20 feet above her head. I picked up one of her letters, my hands trembling. "My dearest Arthur," it began. "The snow fell today. The first of the season." Thomas was so excited. He tried to catch the flakes on his tongue. He asked about you. I told him you were working hard, building something important, and that you would be home soon. I hope it was not a lie. The house is so quiet without you, even though I know you are so close. I miss the sound of your laugh. I pray you are finding some peace up there, my love. I will leave the light on for you. Always, your Eleanor. I put the letter down, a raw, ragged sob tearing its way out of my chest. I cried. I sat in that dusty, forgotten room and wept. I wept for Arthur, for his unimaginable pain and his profound sacrifice. He didn't abandon his family. He had quarantined his own trauma to protect them. He had built a prison for himself out of love. And I wept for Eleanor, for her quiet strength, her unending loyalty, her lonely vigil. And then I wept for myself. For the years I had spent feeling utterly alone in my own brokenness. For the bridges I had burned, for the people I had pushed away because I was afraid of the darkness inside me. I wasn't a freak. I wasn't a failure. I was a Miller. And this quiet suffering, this hidden war, was part of my inheritance. The last part of the journal was written over many years. The entries became less frequent. He wrote about his son growing up, seen from a distance. He described watching him play in the yard from the grimy loft window, a silent, invisible father. He wrote about the farm struggling, about the debts piling up. He had started working at night, sneaking out to take odd jobs at neighboring farms for cash, which he would leave for Eleanor to find. That was the source of the money in the box. It was his legacy, saved over decades of silent, lonely work. The final entry was dated June 4th, 1968. The handwriting was shaky, weak. "Eleanor is gone. The doctor said her heart just gave out. She was tired. I saw them carry her from the house. My boy, a man now, with a family of his own, stood on the porch and wept. I could not go to him. I could not comfort him. The secret is too old, the lie too deep. He thinks his father abandoned him. Perhaps he is right. Without her, the light is gone. There is no reason to stay. The world has moved on. The farm will be sold. But I will keep the barn. I will hold on to this last piece of her, of us. I will leave what little I have saved. Perhaps one day, someone of my blood will find this place. Someone who needs a refuge as much as I did. Perhaps they will understand. This was not an act of abandonment. It was an act of love, a broken man's love. That is all I have to offer." He had never left the loft. He had died up here, alone. The lawyer's letter said he had been found by the man who came to formally seize the property for the back taxes. He had died in his sleep, on the cot. An old man, a ghost in his own home. He had stayed, a silent guardian, for 50 years. And he had left this for me. Not just the money. Not just the barn. He had left me his story. He had left me a map. I looked at the bundles of cash, the developer's offer, the easy way out. It felt like a betrayal. Selling this land, letting them tear down this barn, would be like erasing Arthur's life, his sacrifice. It would be like saying it meant nothing. I picked up the photograph of the young soldier. I looked into his serious eyes. He wasn't a stranger anymore. He was family. And I knew what I had to do. The choice was never really a choice at all. It was a duty. It was an honor. The sun had set, and the loft was now plunged into a deep, velvety darkness, broken only by the faint silver light of the moon through the dirty window. A profound cold had settled into the space, the kind of cold that sinks right into your bones. But I didn't feel it. I was filled with a strange, fierce warmth. I carefully packed the journal and the letters back into the footlocker, but I kept the photograph of Arthur out, propping it up on the small table next to the kerosene lamp. I found a book of matches in a tin box and, after a few tries, managed to light the lamp. A warm golden glow pushed back the shadows, illuminating the small circle of Arthur's world. The light flickered across his young, hopeful face. I didn't sleep on the cot. It felt too sacred, like sleeping on a grave. Instead, I unrolled my own sleeping bag on the floorboards a few feet away, using my duffel bag as a pillow. I lay there in the quiet, listening to the old barn groan and settle around me. It wasn't a frightening sound. It was the sound of something ancient and alive, breathing in the dark. For the first time in years, the noise in my head was silent. The looping images of the war, the angry voices, the constant, grinding anxiety, they were all gone. In their place was a deep, resonant calm. I felt Arthur's presence here, not as a ghost to be feared, but as a guardian, a kindred spirit. I was not alone. I had never been. My pain was not just my own. It was an echo, passed down through a generation. And in that shared history, I found not a burden, but a strange and powerful comfort. I thought about the choice before me. I could take the money, the $20,000 that felt like a fortune, and call the lawyer in the morning. I could tell him to accept the developer's offer. The total sum would be enough to change my life. I could get a small apartment in a city far away from here, buy a car, get some new clothes. I could try to build a new identity, a man with a comfortable bank account and no past, a clean slate. It was the sensible path. It was the path everyone would tell me to take. But as I lay there in the quiet darkness of the loft, the idea felt hollow, cheap. It felt like a betrayal. Arthur hadn't saved that money for me to run away. He had saved it through decades of lonely, back-breaking work, a silent penance. It was the physical manifestation of his love and his sacrifice. Selling this place, this sanctuary he had built, would be to trample on his memory. It would be to agree with the world that he was just a crazy old hermit who had abandoned his family. But I knew the truth now. I had read it in his own hand. This barn wasn't a ruin. It was a monument. It was a testament to a love so deep it chose isolation over causing harm. How could I let a developer tear it down to build a concrete warehouse? How could I replace this story with a parking lot? The other path was harder. It was uncertain. It meant staying here, in this forgotten corner of the world. It meant using the money not to escape, but to invest. To pay the taxes, to fix the roof, to make this place livable. It meant embracing the cold, the isolation, the hard work. It meant choosing to build something instead of running away. It was a terrifying prospect. I had no skills, no plan. I had spent the last 2 years learning how to be invisible, how to take up as little space as possible. This was the opposite. This was planting a flag. This was claiming a home. I fell asleep with the question turning over and over in my mind. When I woke, the first light of dawn was filtering through the window, painting the loft in shades of gray and soft rose. I felt rested, truly rested, for the first time in as long as I could remember. The decision was made. It had been made the moment I read Arthur's last words. I packed up my sleeping bag, my movements sure and deliberate. I took one last look at the little world he had built, now illuminated by the morning sun. "Thank you," I whispered into the quiet air. "I understand." I climbed down the ladder, my mind clear. I had a purpose. I walked the 3 miles back to the crossroads. The morning was crisp and beautiful. The world felt new. The small depot was closed, but there was a payphone on the outside wall. I remembered the lawyer's number from the letter. I fed the phone a pocketful of the quarters I'd been saving for laundry and dialed. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Davies, Davies and Finch. I'd like to speak to Mr. Davies, I said. My voice didn't shake. It's Elias Miller. I was put on hold, listening to a bland instrumental version of a song I didn't recognize. Then Davies came on the line, his voice smooth and impatient. Mr. Miller, I trust you've had time to consider the offer. I have the paperwork ready to be overnighted to you. We can have this all settled by the end of the week. I've considered it, I said, looking out at the empty road, the rising sun glinting off the frost-covered fields. I'm not selling. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing what I'd said. I'm sorry, he said, his tone shifting slightly, a hint of annoyance creeping in. I don't think I heard you correctly. You heard me, I said, my voice steady. I'm not selling the property. I want to pay the back taxes. Mr.
Miller, Davies said, his voice now laced with condescension, as if speaking to a child. Let's be realistic. The amount is substantial, and the property is, forgive me for being blunt, worthless. The structure is condemned. The land is overgrown. This offer from the development firm is a gift. It's a way out for you. A way out. He didn't understand. This wasn't a way out. This was a way in. The money for the taxes is not a problem, I said, the words feeling powerful and true. I have it. Tell me what I need to do to wire it to the county tax office. There was another, longer silence. I could picture him in his expensive office, in his leather chair, completely baffled. I, the homeless veteran, the charity case, was turning down a fortune to hold on to a derelict barn. It didn't compute in his world. This is highly irregular, Mr.
Miller, he finally said, his voice stiff. And if I may say so, unwise. It's my decision, I said. The property is mine, correct? Technically, yes, he admitted grudgingly. Then send me the information for the tax payment. I'm keeping the barn. I hung up before he could argue further. I leaned against the cold wall of the depot, the receiver still in my hand, and I let out a long, slow breath. A grin spread across my face. A real, genuine grin. It felt foreign, like using a muscle I hadn't used in years. I had done it. I had made a choice. Not the easy choice, not the logical choice, but my choice. I was staying. I was home. The first few weeks were a blur of hard physical labor. The kind of labor that makes your muscles scream and your bones ache, but that leaves your mind quiet and clear.
After wiring the tax money from the bank in the next town over, an experience that involved a suspicious teller and a lot of explanation, the remaining cash felt both like a lifeline and a heavy responsibility. Arthur's sacrifice was now my seed money. I couldn't waste it. I started with the basics. My first purchase was not food or comfort, but a set of heavy-duty work gloves, a pry bar, a good hammer, and a box of nails. I walked out of the Havenwood hardware store feeling more capable than I had in years. The owner, a grizzled man named Sal, had watched me with a skeptical eye, his expression making it clear he'd seen transients like me before. I didn't say much. I just paid in cash and left. I knew words wouldn't convince him. Only work would. My first project was the barn itself. It had to be watertight before winter truly set in. The roof was the biggest challenge. I spent a full day just clearing the debris and moss off the bowing gambrel roof, clinging to the steep pitch with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I found the worst of the leaks and, using tar and salvaged planks, I patched them as best I could. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. When the first big rain came a week later, I stood in the middle of the barn floor and watched as only a few minor drips made their way through. It was a victory. Down below, I began the colossal task of cleaning. 50 years of dust, dirt, and decay. I shoveled out layers of old, rotted hay that had turned to black soil. I hauled out broken equipment, careful to set aside the interesting pieces, the hand-forged tools, the old leather harnesses. Each object was a piece of the story, and I felt like an archaeologist as much as a laborer. I swept the floors, the dust billowing in thick clouds that caught the light, and for the first time, I could see the true expanse of the ground floor. It was a vast, open space, full of potential. I chose a section in the corner, the one that got the most morning light, and designated it as my living area. I built a raised wooden floor to keep the damp out, and framed in 2 small rooms, a bedroom and a main living space. It was rough, rudimentary carpentry, but it was solid. It was mine. The loft, however, I left untouched. I would go up there every evening, light the kerosene lamp, and sit in Arthur's chair. It became my ritual. I didn't read the journal again. I didn't need to. The story was etched into my memory. I just sat in the silence, the photograph of the young soldier my only company. It was my way of honoring him, of keeping his sanctuary sacred. The loft was his space, the ground floor would be mine. We would be guardians of this place together. My days fell into a simple, grounding rhythm. Wake at sunrise, work on the barn, a trip into town for supplies, more work. Then the evening ritual in the loft. I started clearing the land around the barn, cutting back the brambles and thorny brush that had choked the 5 acres. It was slow, painstaking work. With every swing of the scythe I'd found hanging on the wall, I felt like I was cutting away the overgrown mess in my own head, clearing a space for something new to grow. The physical exhaustion was a blessing. At night, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that had eluded me for years. The nightmares that had plagued me, the ones filled with sand and shouting and the metallic taste of fear, began to fade. They didn't vanish completely, but they became distant, their edges blurred, like a memory from someone else's life. My regular trips into Havenwood became a part of the routine. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business. At first, I was an object of curiosity and suspicion. The crazy vet who was living in the old, derelict Miller barn. I could feel their eyes on me when I walked into the diner for a cup of coffee, or into Sal's hardware store for more nails. I kept to myself, was polite, but quiet, and just kept working. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Sal went from grunt-like acknowledgments to asking, "What's the project today, Miller?" He even gave me a discount on a set of used window frames he had in the back. "They'll just rot here otherwise," he mumbled, refusing to make eye contact. It was his way of offering a hand. The waitress at the diner, a woman named Mary with kind eyes and a perpetually tired smile, started leaving an extra slice of pie with my coffee. "You look like you could use it," she'd say, waving away my attempt to pay. These small gestures of acceptance felt monumental. They were threads connecting me to this place, to this community. I wasn't just a ghost passing through anymore. I was becoming part of the landscape. One afternoon, an old farmer in a pickup truck pulled over as I was wrestling with a fallen tree near the road. He got out, a tall, wiry man with a face like a dried apple. "That's Arthur Miller's place," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," I said, leaning on my axe, catching my breath. "He was my great-grandfather." The man nodded slowly, his eyes appraising me, then the barn. "Heard you were fixing it up. Folks said you were crazy." He paused. "Arthur was a good man. Quiet. Kept to himself after the Great War. People didn't understand him. War does things to a man." He looked me square in the eye, and in his gaze, I saw a deep, knowing wisdom. He understood. "My name's George. he said, sticking out a calloused hand. "My dad farmed the next plot over. He knew your great-grandfather. Said he was the hardest worker he ever met." We shook hands. It was the first time someone had looked at me and not seen a problem to be solved or a threat to be managed. They saw a Miller. They saw a man who worked hard. That evening, as I sat in the loft, I felt a sense of peace that was so complete it was almost overwhelming. The work was far from over, winter was coming, and it would be hard. But looking out the small window at the land I was slowly reclaiming, I knew I had made the right choice. I wasn't just rebuilding a barn, I was rebuilding a life. Spring arrived, not with a sudden burst, but as a slow, tentative thaw. The last of the snow melted away, revealing the dark, rich soil underneath. The branches of the skeletal trees began to swell with buds. The air, which for months had been sharp and sterile, now carried the sweet, loamy scent of life returning. I stood on the new wooden steps I had built for the barn's main door, a mug of hot coffee warming my hands, and watched the sunrise paint the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold. The 5 acres of land I had spent the winter clearing were beginning to show hints of green. A year ago, I had been sleeping on a mat in a homeless shelter, my world confined to the space of a duffel bag, my future a terrifying blank. Now I had this land, this solid, soaring barn, this peace. The work had been my salvation, the physical act of building, of repairing, of creating order out of chaos, had been a form of therapy more powerful than any I had ever known. I had replaced the rotten beams, reglazed the windows, and built a simple but comfortable home for myself on the ground floor. I had learned to work with wood, to read the language of the weather, to find a rhythm with the seasons. The man who had arrived here, hollowed out and hopeless, was gone. In his place was someone quieter, stronger, more settled in his own skin. I still had bad days. There were still moments when a sudden noise would set my teeth on edge, or a memory would rise unbidden. But they no longer had power over me. They were just echoes, and this place, this solid, quiet sanctuary, absorbed them. I had become a part of Havenwood. George, the old farmer, would stop by once a week, bringing a thermos of coffee and offering unsolicited but always useful advice. Sal, from the hardware store, had hired me for a few odd jobs, and I'd discovered I had a knack for fixing things. I was earning a little money, enough to get by. I was no longer living off Arthur's legacy, I was building my own. I had even started a small garden in the rich soil behind the barn, planting rows of potatoes, carrots, and beans, just as I imagined Arthur must have done. The act of putting seeds in the earth and trusting they would grow felt like the ultimate act of faith. One bright May afternoon, I was tilling the garden when I saw a car pull up to the end of my lane. It was a sleek, black sedan, the kind that looked completely out of place on the rustic country road. A man in an expensive suit got out. It was Mr. Davies, the lawyer. He walked toward me, picking his way carefully through the mud, a look of profound distaste on his face. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. "I was in the area on other business and thought I would stop by." "Mr. Davies," I said, leaning on my shovel. I was covered in dirt and sweat. I probably looked like his worst nightmare. His eyes scanned the property, the repaired barn, the cleared fields, the fledgling garden. He looked genuinely stunned. "I have to say," he admitted, "this is not what I was expecting." He held out a briefcase. "The development firm asked me to make you one final offer. It's substantially more than the last one. They are very keen to acquire this parcel for their new logistics hub." He named a number that was truly staggering. It was life-changing money. A year ago, it would have been the answer to all my prayers. I looked at him, then at the barn, its gray wood glowing in the afternoon sun. I thought of Arthur, hiding in the loft, sacrificing his life to protect his family from his own pain. I thought of his journal, of the love and sorrow etched into every page. I thought of the peace I had found here, in the dirt and the silence. This place wasn't a parcel. It wasn't an asset. It was a legacy. It was a home. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," I said, and for the first time, I actually meant it. But my answer is the same. The property is not for sale. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if he simply could not comprehend my words. He saw a man in dirty clothes turning down a fortune for a patch of dirt. He saw a fool. But I knew what he couldn't see. He couldn't see the ghost of a young soldier who had finally found peace. He couldn't see the silent love that had soaked into this soil. He couldn't see that I hadn't inherited a piece of real estate. I had inherited a reason to live. I had inherited a second chance. Davies just shook his head, muttered something about making a mistake, and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, a plume of dust rising behind him, until the black car disappeared from view. I was alone again, with the wind and the birds and the quiet hum of the land coming to life. I turned back to my garden, drove the shovel into the soft earth, and smiled. The work wasn't over. It would never be over. And I was grateful for that. Every day, I was building on Arthur's foundation. I was honoring his sacrifice not by hiding from the world, but by planting my feet firmly in it. I was home. Home isn't always four walls and a roof. Sometimes it's a story that finds you right when you need it most. Sometimes it's a quiet piece of land that teaches you how to be still. For me, home was the discovery that I wasn't alone in my struggle, that the war inside me was a battle others had fought before. Arthur didn't leave me a property. He left me a permission slip, permission to be broken, and the space to heal. He taught me that inheritance isn't about what you're given, but what you choose to do with it. You can sell it for a quick profit, or you can invest your own sweat and soul into it and make it mean something. What does home mean to you? Have you ever found a place or a story that changed the course of your life? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter just as much as mine. This channel is a community for people who understand that the hardest roads often lead to the most beautiful destinations. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in the power of second chances and the quiet work of rebuilding, please hit that subscribe button and join us. We're all just trying to find our way back, one story at a time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.